about a round of applause for Leopold, our keynote speaker, opening the session with some excellent points about being a role model, which is such an important area. So thank you very much for that. And thank you all as well for being here. Over 50 plus countries. What an amazing celebration that we have over the next day as we dive into more of the issues that pertain to this incredible conference. But I first want to acknowledge the Vice Mayor and, of course, the IESF President and all the dignitaries who are here today and for making that possible. So a round of applause for all of them one more time as we get into the meat of the next day's program. My name is Charmaine Crooks, and it's, now I don't come from an e-sport background, but I do come from a traditional sport background as a 5-time Canadian Olympian. And today we're going to be talking about so many different aspects of e-sport, and I'm so thrilled that we begin the first session with one of the fathers of e-sport, who is from right here in Korea. So please recognize one of our first panelists who will join us, Mr. Youngman Kim, Korea Esports Association President and one of the founders of e-sport, not just here, but his impact around the world is global. And our next speaker, Brosh from the Israeli Esports Association, the president. Please join us, Ido. And next we have Nalain Naidoo from AISTS, the head of business development, all the way from Lausanne, Switzerland. And then we have Reid Melton. We all know Reid. He was the moderator last year, and many years he's passed me the baton. This year he is with RAPIDCASTING, a commentator and well known to all of you in the esports space. Please welcome Reid. Come on stage. Got lots to hear from you as always. And finally from Thailand, Mr. Samart Benjamin Assarasakorn, an agent with Agent Eco Limited, well known in the esports space, marketing. Please, Big Ben, where are you? Come on up. Please have a seat, everyone. So this first panel, we'll all have a seat. Everybody good? Everybody good? We're all getting our mics. It's the first panel, so let us all settle in as we get ready to have about 40 minutes of discussion with all of our panelists. And these sessions are all about interaction. So we're also going to give 10 to 15 minutes at the very end of every session for question and answer. So if there's something that you'd like to dive into, please, all of our panelists are here to hear more from you and also to share more. And I see that the chairs have been shuffled, which is a good start, right? Okay, so here we are. So once again, for those who will be having translation, number 1 for English, if you'd like to listen in, for those who we have the simultaneous translation. I want to start with, of course, the legend. Mr. Youngman Kim. I want to start with the legend. So Mr. Kim, you heard in the opening and when you see what is happening here in Busan, what is happening all around the world now in e-sport, and you were part of that. So tell us, if you will, how this inspiration came to you to get into this field in the first place, this movement really now.
여러분들 다 아시는 스타크래프트 아시죠? 제가 98년에 스타크래프트를 한국에 서비스를 시작했습니다. 그때만 해도 게임이지 그게 무슨 e스포츠냐라는 시각이 굉장히 많았고요. 제가 어린아이들 다 버려놓는 사람이라고 얘기를 들었습니다. 20년 전에 제가 게임 회사를 할 때 그 e스포츠가 이만큼 성장할 거라고는 솔직히 예상을 못했습니다만 프로게이머로 스타크래프트가 만들어지고 또 방송 일반 스포츠 씬에서는 중계 방송을 할 때 ENG 카메라만 갖다 대면 되지만 게임은 중계할 때 ENG 카메라만 갖고 되는 게 아니라 그 관중들이 볼 수 있는 업저버 모드를 만들어야 되는 부분도 있고 그래서 개발사와 그런 협업을 해야 되는 일도 있었고요. 또 한편으로는 프로게이머라는 직업으로서의 그 인정받는 것, 그 다음에 스테이크 홀더가 마케팅을 하기 위해서 이게 대위를 하지만 그게 그 당시에는 중앙정보부 얘기할 때도 그 게임사로서 하는 일들이 프로모션을 위한 일, 그러니까 돈을 버는 그 수단으로서 인식될 수밖에 없었기 때문에 캐스파라는 그 협단체를 만들어서 중앙정부 또 게이머들의 어떤 직업군으로서 인정받는 일들, 그 다음에 방송사 이런 분들을 그 조정하고 그 이렇게 시장 성장할 수 있게 만들어내는데 필요한 협단체가 필요했습니다. 그래서 캐스파를 만들었고요. 지금 20년 후에 IESF의 이런 패널로서의 자리에 제가 앉았는데 지금은 e스포츠 성장 가능성을 다 보고 있기 때문에 이렇게 각국에서 와서 이렇게 보고 있는데 아직도 해결해야 할 문제가 많다고 생각합니다. 오늘 많은 말씀 나누면서 문제 해결을 해갔으면 좋겠습니다.
Well, thank you. That was a great, very inspiring opening indeed. And it's something that has certainly led to the creation of such a large stakeholder field. And one of those is especially the national associations that we see today, which you're representing, Ido. So maybe you could speak about how that's impacted you from when this started.
Well, as everyone knows, there are a lot of associations around the world in Asia and Europe in different cultures, and each association obviously has its own agenda on how to promote esports. But I think the main goal of every association, every national association, is to promote esports in their country to drive the growth of the esports industry and the esports players in their country. So I think the main role and responsibility of a national federation would always be to be the mediating ground between big esports, like the global esports, and the national level.
And you work, of course, with the government agencies and the other stakeholders, as he mentioned, right?
Yes, of course. Government agencies, publishers, promoters, organizers, clubs, and players are all part of the same ecosystem that drives the growth of esports in every country. Of course, there are bigger countries where you have more presence from publishers or game organizers or sponsors. So in those countries, the role of the national federation would be a bit different from a national federation in smaller countries like Israel, where you don't have the big presence of the big companies, and then you have a bit more responsibility of how to guide and mediate between the big international esports and the local culture.
Maybe just a show of hands so we can see all those who are members of national federations here today. So we have, yes, we have quite a bit. Most of the room, actually, we have quite a bit, and other stakeholders as well, of course. How about government stakeholders, just so we have an idea of the types of individuals who are here? Yes, we have a few there too. So just to give you all the landscape of what we have. But one of them, another stakeholder that's very important, of course, is the sponsorship and the marketing. And I know you have many insights to share about that. Samart?
Yep, most definitely. I mean, I also wear many hats on the federation part
Yes,
as
of
well.
course, yeah.
But I think it is important here for my role today to share about the commercial side and how to integrate the commercial side with the public sector, which is the federation, on behalf of each government body that gives the power to the federation to regulate or come up with policies addressing the social issues to esports. As well, I think each country is different, and of course, like with Kesper here, is very strong, and we can learn a few takeaways from Kesper as well. And I think a lot of the other federations, the smaller ones that are still developing, would need some guidance. And my role as an agency, we go in and address these issues and see what are the issues and how can we come up with a model that is sustainable, a business model that is sustainable, because esports, I know each and every one of you here that comes from a federation has a hard time in getting government funding, budgets, unless you have a good program and policies and a good marketing strategy. And of course, if your athlete wins a medal, then there'll be some money coming in from your government. But before then, you've got to take care of yourself. So I help federations and other stakeholders, such as sponsors as well, who want to tap into the esports world, but still don't know how, who, when, and we customize it because esports is very new. And from a traditional sports point of view, they have, when you go ask for money and from a sponsor, they will ask what is the package, how much, this and that, what I get. But with esports, my approach is always to, hey, let's sit down and discuss what do you want, what does the federation need, and then we customize it together.
So it has to be tailor-made for each.
Exactly.
Yes. Now, back when you were starting, you didn't have a lot of that. So what is the smallest advice that you would give to someone, to a federation just starting out who might be in a bind and they have nothing? So, passion will only get you so far, but what piece of advice would you give?
Well, I think the most important thing is to identify what are your key strong points. But the federation has one thing that from the commercial sector doesn't, which is you are the only one in your country that is a national team. Mm-hmm. You are the only official that can promote the official national team. Now, I foresee that the trend in esports, so we have pro teams, we have all these leagues around the world, but, we talk about Olympics and we talk about, of course, World Championship, IESF, and if we're going along the road of the Olympics, making esport is a real sport, now that has, it goes mainstream. Mm-hmm. Sponsors like things that are official, that is mainstream, and then they would invest more money into that, into esports or your federation.
I see, Nalain, you're nodding your head because that's an area that you are focused on every day.
Yeah. So my background, somehow I always find myself in controversial roles or organizations that face a lot of controversy when it comes to their association with sport. So I have worked and represented Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and Dow as Olympic top partners, as well as UEFA and FIFA sponsors. And what I do find is that while working for these organizations, my tendency was also to shift budget that went into traditional sport towards esport. And that's where I found, it was engaging more with my target audience, the youth of today, and pretty much the future. If you really wanted to connect with your stakeholder, it was within the esport federations and organizations. And at that point, I also saw a need in terms of education, where I'm talking about universities, etc. And by that I mean is that we're always questioning where the youth of today, or why are they going into esports? And that took me into trying to better understand their thinking, but also that educational institutes need to start understanding why is there a shift in this. And before criticizing an organization is to understand what is it that they're giving to our youth that is directing our youth to go into these organizations. And before we can become controversial to this topic, we need to actually understand it. And in the last months, we've done quite a bit of research work with the IESF, and that's to understand the role of traditional sport versus esport, but also to better understand refereeing and see both sides of the picture. But I also think that most educational institutions are sitting with a little bit of dinosaurs, and we need to start realizing the trends and educating ourselves with the right stakeholders.
So when you said education, are you talking from grassroots all the way up to the university level as well, or tell me?
Yes. So really it is from grassroots on, but teachers to understand what it is that makes our youth, distract from the traditional way of doing things. But as I'm with the Academy of Sports Science and Technology in Lausanne, founding organization by the IOC as well, I've really focused on traditional education, being education, medical sciences, law linked to sport. But a huge portion was missing, and that is the e-sport culture. And I think that this is a huge dimension in sport, and for our future sport leaders to understand their role in this whole thing, and not just focus on sport in terms of technology or sport law or sports medicine, but what about sport and e-sport? This is where let's put it this way, this is where the venues, I mean, when you talk about an Olympic event, a lot of infrastructure is put into an Olympic venue, but how much are these venues used, and can esports utilize the same venues? So is there an overlap? And there's an education gap missing there between traditional versus esport.
Did you ever think you'd see the day when you hear this, having been there in the beginning and seeing how far things are coming? And so let's go now to Reid, and you've seen it all. As a host, as a commentator, you are right smack in the middle of all of this. So how do you view stakeholders and how they can work together to better the system?
So my position is very unique, I feel, in the sense that I get to be sort of the face or the mouthpiece of a lot of different organizations, whether it's the tournament organizer or the publisher, or even the voice of the fans speaking to publishers or tournament organizers saying, well, hey, this is what people want, or this is, or just trying to explain what is a very complex, kind of nuanced environment like esports, or like an esports event or environment. And so it's really interesting to see how everything does truly interconnect. And while you would traditionally think of something like an esports stakeholder as a publisher or as a federation, you could actually think of everyone in the circle or the chain or the web or whatever model you want to think of it as, everyone as an esports stakeholder. The fans have a stake in that they want their games to be fun and exciting and watchable and go to huge events and see really cool big productions. The publishers obviously are a big stakeholder in that they produce the games that people play and watch and want to see this on a very large scale as well. And then there are a lot of intermediaries that facilitate this in ways that, like federations, are still realizing the value and the position that they have in the esports ecosystem. And so I think a lot of what we're going to talk about is the rights and the roles and the responsibilities of everyone along the chain. And I think what I have observed most is that everyone just wants it all to work, but not everyone realizes or recognizes the best way for that to happen, or that it has to be with each other. And so I think a real benefit and a real point of a panel like this and a convention, a summit like this, is to try to not only explain and educate, but also to just come to the realization that working together and finding where everyone fits and can help each other in that esports ecosystem is a really, really important issue.
Definitely stronger together. You were going to add to this?
레이드가 원래 스타크래프트 게이머 출신인데 지금 캐스트하고 계시잖아요. 어떻게 보면 저희 캐스파나 IESF가 고민하고 있는 것들이 직업군으로서도 이 스포츠 씬에서 보면 게이머 아마추어에서 프로까지 가고 그 다음에 직업을 무엇으로 할 거냐 이런 고민도 저희가 굉장히 많이 하게 되는 거죠. 그래서 특히 교육 관련된 쪽에서나 기존의 그 스포츠 씬에서 보면 이 게임 가지고 e스포츠라는 걸 하기 때문에 무브먼트가 없잖아요. 이렇게 액션하고 이런 것들이. 그래서 그게 무슨 스포츠냐 이런 그 우려를 가지고 있는 부분이 있고요. 그래서 저희가 대한민국은 보면 이미 13년 전부터 아마추어 리그 대회를 운영을 하고 있고 대통령 배로서 그러면서 그 청소년층이 자연스럽게 아마추어로 성장하다가 아마추어 씬에서 우승한 선수들은 또 프로씬으로 바로 넘어가는 이런 생태계를 만드는 일은 스테이크 홀더는 이런 데 관심이 없는 거죠. 돈 버는 일에 관심이 있는 거죠. 제가 이렇게 얘기하면 스테이크 홀더에서 오신 분들은 기분 나빠할지 모르겠지만 프로 대회에 돈을 버는 그러니까 아까 스폰서십을 가져야 되고 또 그 대회를 통해서 많은 광고도 해야 되고 이런 부분은 분명히 있죠. 그러니까 저희가 고민할 부분은 아마추어 씬에서 이런 생태계가 만들어지는 부분에 대한 고민 그게 이미 저희는 14년 전부터 해오고 있는데 이런 일들이 여기 모인 IESF의 모든 분들이 고민해야 될 일인 것 같고요. 또 교육과 연계돼서는 저희가 2달 전에 충청남도 교육청과 그냥 e스포츠 축제인데 청소년들이 좋아하는 이 축제를 교육과 연관시킨 부분 예를 들어서 저희들이 협회에서 이미 그 선생님들과 학생들한테 예를 들어서 캐스터 교육이라든지 그 다음에 게임 캐릭터 만드는 부분 이래서 게임이 만들어지는 제작 과정 그 다음에 e스포츠로서에서 방송 제작 이런 것들을 가르쳐 가지고 그 축제를 할 수 있는 걸로 했는데 굉장히 좋은 반응도 얻었고 이게 결국적으로 보면 아마추어 씬에서 이미 한국은 게임 학과도 만들어져 있고 e스포츠 학과도 이미 만들어져 있고 또 많은 대학교에서도 e스포츠 학과를 만들려고 노력을 하고 있습니다. 이런 것들이 여기 오신 각국에 계신 분들이 교육과 연계돼서 어떻게 움직이고 있는지에 대한 부분이 같이 이렇게 만들어갈 부분이라고 생각을 합니다.
Absolutely. Do you want to respond to that?
I'd actually like to say that this was the reason the Academy of Sports Science and Technology was founded by the IOC and a few of the organizations in Switzerland, because there was always the gap on the traditional side was what happens to athletes when their careers come to an end. And I think there's a huge area that athletes can actually go into, and I can see what your organization is doing, but I think this is something that universities globally need to start looking at, because that's going to be a question they're going to be asking themselves with esport athletes coming up in the next 5 or in the near short future.
I'd also like to add, and connecting what Reid said, I think it's very true that all the stakeholders in the esports are working together. This is very important to do right now, because right now there is a momentum of esports around the world, with a lot of governmental agencies, universities, as you said, as sponsors and as a for-profit corporation and so on, looking into esports and saying, how can I get in? And don't really understand what's the big deal, what is it really all about, but they want to get in. I think that only by working together, all the stakeholders in the industry, national federations, clubs, players, publishers, promoters, and so on, we will be able to efficiently explain to them what is the big deal, and most importantly, make sure that everyone understands that esport is not some passing phenomena that will disappear in a few years, but is something that is here to stay, something that is here to only grow larger over time.
Samart, maybe you can give us a tangible example of how that synergy, how some of those collaborations have worked.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Ido here about regarding like sponsors are looking at what is with the federation, the events or coming up with a national championship or something like that. You were saying about how sponsors can, benefit from this. So take an example. Like recently in Thailand, we had an event with one of the telcos, and of course, we didn't have any sponsors, traditional sponsors back then. Oh, what are you going to get? Naming rights and all these type of things. So we sat down and customized it. And they wanted to engage because they're in the business of, selling internet and 3G and 4G and all these things. And, esports, you use a lot of these data, right? So we sat down and customized all these things. And, this is a new thing, like you can't ask for mega millions. So, they would say, oh, I only have this much budget, and then we will work with that. And then that will evolve to other renewals. And you can then start to attract other sponsors. Once you hook in one big sponsor, you can have other sponsors. And don't look at the big money, look at the small money with the little like SMEs or the smaller companies, because they do want to, engage in the esports world and plug into this platform. And I think working with like KESPA or with other strong associations in esports to share the knowledge of wealth, not just, making money, to other smaller organizations, so that it grows bigger and bigger. And the more the market grows, the more wealth is there, and the longevity, the sustainability will be more sustainable in the future.
I was just going to add to that a lot of people look at esports and they see the E as electronic, whereas I think the real force behind esports is that it's the evolution of sports or competitive content that is pretty universal. I think what ties esports, sports, and together is how interesting and exciting it is for anyone, anywhere to watch a competition of really any kind. And maybe you have your preference for what kind of competitions you like to watch, but I think everyone's starting to realize that the kinds of competitions that are popular amongst many demographics are starting to become esports related. And so the ecosystems for traditional sports are very well understood and well established and fleshed out. And so a lot of people are trying to apply the traditional sports model, whether it's federations working with governing bodies or larger bodies like the IOC. They're trying to apply these traditional methods to esports as if they are two separate things, when in fact they're more similar than they are different. And I think it's important not only to learn from established stakeholders in the esports industry, but also to recognize that we're all working towards one thing, and that is global enjoyment of competitive content. And I think there's a lot of really exciting work that's going on between stakeholders that already have a stake in traditional sports, coming to esports and looking to expand that in a very similar way.
Nalain, let's talk about some of those similarities with traditional sport. My background is traditional sports. I work in the tech business, and of course, esport. There are so many similarities. You're working with that every day and doing some of the research. So maybe you can share some of those trends that people are seeing that we can really capitalize on to really expand the reach and depth and access to esport.
Well, I think I'm going to speak with my sponsor's hat on. So when I worked at Coca-Cola or at McDonald's, I did see the shift, and I personally shifted budget from traditional sport towards esport, because a lot of the platforms that we actually were advertising on captured or attract the esport audience. So, and we did do some statistics, and I do recall while at McDonald's that we had in-game advertising, but aside from that, at peak advertising times, where we knew that gamers were on, in different markets, so pretty much in the evening sessions, and we could see the shift in sales with the restaurants call-in, etc. So you could see the trends or the budgets going up.
So was it market driven, or was it a strategy in the company, or a little
we
bit of both?
did a few test markets, and when we saw that this was working, it became a global strategy, and a global strategy to shift then towards the esport target audience. And I can tell you, so that's just the sales driver, the sales pitch. But I think to grow consumer, how do you say, loyalty. These sponsors don't just need to advertise during the gaming, but they need to be in the face during the game, sponsor events, and literally, I would say, not just about sales, but about loyalty to the esport stakeholder, and that's where I say the sponsors need exposure during major events, esport events, and I think it works on both sides. And when they see that the one is working, there is no reason why they should not look into sponsoring of big events.
And federations as well. So how does a federation really capitalize off of that? Because all these stakeholders, they're all, rising as a result of the players and everything. So where's the balance for you as a federation?
Well, I said in the beginning that I think that in each country the situation is a bit different. Obviously, we are working on a common ground, but in each country you have sometimes maybe a well-developed private esports scene. Sometimes you don't have a developed esports scene at all, and the national federation has to do that as well. So I think that in terms of sponsorship, each federation, I think Benjamin, you said it best early in this panel, that each federation has to identify the objective, also identify who they are speaking for. When they come to sponsors as well as government bodies, by the way, because it's basically the same thing. You want to go to them and you want to get money. So you want to get funding for your mission and for your project. So it's basically the same thing, and you have to identify what are you offering them and who are you speaking for, what kind of stages are you able to offer them for these projects.
Can I quickly comment on that?
Sure.
And this is again benchmarking between traditional and esport, and I can tell you that there are a lot of federations that are out there, and I'm not going to make mention of names. The smaller ones that I've worked together with, not the FIFAs, not the IOCs, that are in exactly the same shoes as you are, because the sponsors, why would I want to sponsor a federation that does not give me much visibility when I can go into a bigger global event where I can get more out of it? So I think between the two, you see the same trends. When you have a big esport event, you got the sponsors. When you have an ATP, you have the 5 Grand Slams in tennis that attract more money than the national tennis federations. So I think here it's more media visibility that you can offer a sponsor that's actually going to attract the sponsor. And I don't know how, from an esports perspective, traditional federations can actually, esport national federations can engage those local sponsors. So you face the same as the other national federations in traditional sport.
I think that's very true, but you are also touching a very a unique spot in that the consensus is that esport is much like other traditional sports and it's very similar to other traditional sports, but I also think it's important to keep in mind that esport is also very unique. At the same time as being very similar to other traditional sport, it is a sport. I qualify it as a sport as many others. But it's also very unique. One unique trait of it is it being virtual. And I think that a national federation coming to a sponsor or a government agency that have heard hundreds of pitches for sponsorship in the past has to capitalize on the uniqueness of the sport and actually really show what esports can do that other sports simply cannot offer or can offer in a limited capacity, where in esports the capacity and the potential is limitless. And then the sponsors will open their eyes and say, okay, there is something there, we should investigate.
So the sponsors have to evolve in this as well. There's no, one rule for everyone.
Right.
Do you want to jump in
yeah,
real
if
quick?
I can just expand on that. A lot of the value that I think is underutilized or underleveraged when it comes to either local esports federations, especially in smaller, more developing, emerging countries, is that they reach an audience and they have distribution methods that are out of range or off limits to a lot of larger, more traditional esports organizations. So say you have a large esports event, well, you're going to advertise on billboards and buses, and anybody can buy a spot there, but not everybody can reach schools. Not everybody can reach or can have state-sponsored efforts towards smaller esports that can attract a different audience, a different demographic. And to speak to one of the things that Mr. Youngman said, one of the things that KESPA has been very proactive in doing is reaching out to either schools. There's a number of scholastic programs and academies here in Korea, and also supporting the amateur scene and advertising through things like that. And that's something that can be achieved on a government level or on a national federation level in a lot of ways, and in many cases, more easily and more effectively than if you are a big company, you dump a bunch of money into trying to reach your target demographic.
And building the pipeline is what that's all
right.
about. You got to build that pipeline. I'm sure when you started, that pipeline was not much, so you probably had a lot of those types of ways that you had to attract a brand new audience, which is what we're talking about here as well. So maybe you can share how you did help to attract that initial audience through those types of collaborations with government and others. Mr. Youngman, would you like to talk? Yes.
이런 것 같아요. 이렇게 스포츠 하면 관중도 있어야 되고 또 저 스폰서는 많이 알려가지고 얘를 기업의 이윤이 있어야 되고 또 저희가 지금 고민하는 부분은 이를테면 각국의 환경이 다 다를 것 같아요. 예를 들어서 좋아하는 게임 장르도 어디는 레이싱 게임을 좋아하고 어디는 또 전략 게임을 좋아하고 각국의 이 현상이 좀 다른데 그 경험을 이미 저희 캐스파는 20년 동안 해왔습니다. 스테이크 홀더와 방송사와 그다음에 게이머와 스폰서가 어떤 고민이 되는지를 이미 저희가 경험을 했기 때문에 아마도 여기 오신 분들이 그런 고민을 지금 시작하는 이제 국가도 있을 거고 이미 한 중간 정도 고민하는 부분도 있고 이런데 이런 IESF나 이런 걸 통해서 그런 경험과 이런 게 같이 이루어졌으면 좋겠고요. 어떻게 보면 20년 전, 한 17, 18년 된 것 같습니다. 삼성이 월드 사이버 게임 대회를 시작을 할 때 이게 일반 스포츠 씬에서 보면 월드와이드하게 예를 들자면 뭐 프로 팀을 운영을 하고 이렇게 해서 뭔가 그걸 통해서 제품을 홍보하고 이렇잖아요. 삼성전자가 한 20여 년 동안 월드 사이버 게임 대회를 통해서 전 세계의 청소년들한테 애니콜을 굉장히 많이 광고가 되었다고 이미 이제 분석까지 돼 있잖아요. 그러다 보니까 저희가 지금 고민하는 이거를 스폰서를 어떻게 잡을 거냐? 돈이 되면 스폰서가 붙겠죠. 이미 저희 캐스파컵을 작년에 이제 한국의 리그인데 그 대회를 중계 방송하려고 뭐 중국 각국에서 이제 중계권을 가져가려고 애를 쓰는데 125개국에 이게 중계 방송이 트위치나 유튜브를 통해서 이루어지고 있습니다. 이런 것들이 기존의 이게 방송사에서는 생각도 못했던 일들을 이미 이제 인플루언서 마케팅이 인플루언서들이 그런 중계 방송을 하고 우리 레이드 같은 캐스터가 재미 요소를 집어넣기 때문에 그런 고민은 그렇게 안 해도 될 것 같아요.
So, Big Ben.
Yeah.
So up to you now. You're working with a lot of sponsors on a day-to-day basis. How do you see that, I guess, in maybe it's a big word, that role or responsibility for those sponsors to be part of that ecosystem, not just from the ground up, and at varying levels?
Okay.
Where is that today?
Well, first of all, let me just wrap up a few points from our panelists here. From a marketing point of view or an agency point of view with brands, and of course we have many stakeholders here like the federations, which is the athletes, representing the athletes. Now, Reid, you were a gamer before, right? Right?
That's
and
right.
now you have a career in esports as a commentator, and this is the next evolution. So it's about telling a story. It's not about just putting banners up and my naming associated with the federation or whatever organization. It's about telling the story. So from a gamer, you probably spend many hours when you were young at the you know, in the arcade, you know, just plugging away, right?
Way too many hours.
So you're a school kid, right? You just play for fun, right? So you start from zero.
Right.
So sponsors love storytelling in this day and age, and it's esports. Let's face it, it's technology. You know, it's a startup, right, from the traditional sports. So I'm just trying to paint a picture here for everybody here who would like to know, from a federation or a game developer or sponsors, that by telling a story, you are not just relying on one type of sponsorship platform, which is just activation. And you have social media, you have, you know, YouTube and Facebook and Line and whatever, Instagram. So what I'm trying to say is, from a gamer to becoming a national team athlete, you know, going to compete in the World Championships, or recently what we're going to have in December is the SEA Games. And in Asia, in Southeast Asia, national pride, national team is very important, you know, because in that region we cannot compete with the Europeans or the Western countries who are more advanced in this type of sport. You know, they have more resources, more funding. So what I'm trying to say is telling a story from zero gamer to hero, winning a medal on the podium. And you're an Olympian before, right? So you know the feeling in representing your country when you stand up there with the gold medal. Money, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's the pride.
Pride.
And then with that, for the federations, which are the beacon or the center and representing the athletes, sponsors will let come in, because now you have you're on the podium. Your athletes have just won a medal, and sponsors want to be part of that story, part of that hype, from zero to hero.
I like that, zero to hero. So how important is it as a federation to build that culture in the country? And who do you need to work with? Who needs to be on your bus, so to speak, to be able to drive to that goal?
Well, I think that right now we are getting a very unique and exclusive look at the federation. I'm talking about my experience in Israel, but obviously I think the situation is similar in many countries around the world, especially in Europe, where you have this federation building up in really recent years, where you have the esports shifting toward more traditional sports and players starting to embrace the mindset of a sports athlete instead of just a gamer. I think that it's a very unique position where we are in right now, and we can actually witness this change and guide it. And I think this is one of the key stories that Benjamin is talking about. When we are going to sponsors, they want to be there right in the beginning. They want to be perceived as those who have supported from the very grassroots to the very professional level and been there all the way, especially for bigger brands which care more about the brand image, and they want to be seen as the ones who actually guided and supported national teams and national associations from very humble beginnings to the very professional and very prestigious successes. And I think that also when you look at countries and governments, sometimes they have a similar sentiment towards this type of support, because they want to be seen as the ones who actually supported and promoted a young sports from a very beginning, and such a project or such a sport has really shown to be shown and proven to be worthy of such an investment. And everyone wants to be in that position where they can say, "Yeah, I'm the one who helped this and made this happen." So this is one of the key stories that we are trying to sell, so to speak, to sponsors and government agencies to get funding.
Then, Nalain, a lot of big companies are also part of that storytelling from the beginning as well, right? Maybe some examples there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I think that if you came to me and said, could you sponsor an event from grassroots level, you know, I would probably do it more out of a corporate social responsibility
There's different,
to youth.
there's different aspects of the company
yeah,
that would do that.
exactly.
Yeah,
And
foundation
there's-
or whatever.
There's a lot of pressure from organizations for companies to sponsor in this manner. But if you look at the Red Bulls, the Samsungs of this world, they're doing it, but they're doing it, of course, it's there, it's happening. But the big events that engage are the events that they own the naming rights for. And that's what they want. So I think as a national federation, you really need to show the growth. You also really need to show the engagement that you will offer those sponsors on a national level that's going to actually get them to sponsor you, versus the bigger ones and what they get out of their brand awareness. Samsung being a sponsor for the torch relay, original sponsor of Olympics, I mean, that just gave them huge brand visibility globally versus just being a sponsor. So you need to find a unique IP that you can connect with for the sponsor and associate that sponsor with that IP.
I think you're absolutely right, and I also think that you know, for our experience is mostly when we are talking to sponsors, it's mostly for the national team, and there we have a really unique IP where usually we also give the naming rights. You know, so for example, last year we had the national team to the IESF World Championships in Kaohsiung in Taiwan. We had Playtika, which is one of the largest mobile game developers in Israel. Be part of that team as a main sponsor, as a name sponsor. So it was Team Playtika Israel. And the thing that was important to them is to really be part as a name sponsors. They wanted to be, because when it comes to the national teams, it's not like social media banners, right? This is not the type of publicity you're going to get. You're going to get mainly like media mentions from more traditional media, like newspapers, TV, online media outlets, and so on. And they want to be written as, you know, Team Playtika Israel took the first place, second place, third place, and so on.
That's right. I just want to ask you something about, you know, as a former player, and the importance of, I mean, there's a lot of stakeholders out there, obviously, but at the end of the day, you have to build your own brand, right? So maybe you could share about how you did that, how other players are also doing that, as, you know, as opposed to, because it may take a long time to get a big sponsor or even a small sponsor, but at the end of the day, you have to, you know, build your own brand and, you know, develop your own story. So maybe you can give some ideas around that.
Oh yeah, of course. I think the biggest and best thing that you can do for yourself in esports, no matter where you are as a stakeholder, is to build a brand. You know, established brands like companies or organizations, obviously they're already there. But even if from the very smallest beginning player, that's still a brand. One of the unique things about esports is that players have IDs or names that they choose to represent themselves. That's the brand. And so whether they recognize it or not, which is clear from some of the ideas that players choose.
I don't want to tell you my name. I'm not going to tell you my name.
Thank you. Whether they recognize it or not, everybody's building a brand and is an esports stakeholder. So recognizing that is step number one. And then the responsibility of different esports stakeholders is to add and bring value to the brands of everyone involved. So anytime a brand, like a sponsor, goes to a national federation, they're looking to grow their brand. And so is the federation, and so are the players, and so is the tournament that everyone's competing in. And I think that the more that people and players and esports stakeholders can connect on how to grow each other's brands synergistically. I mean, that's what everybody wants, right? As a commentator, I came here to work on League of Legends and StarCraft and most recently PUBG. And one thing all of these games have is this storyline, this path to pro that I think Ben was talking about. And everybody wants to get their brand in this pathway at some point, whether it's like Ido was talking about giving a company naming rights to represent Israel or whatever country it is in this competition. That's getting your brand into the name of this competition. Whether it's the player getting their brand into this competition as the champion of a tournament. Everybody wants to get their brand into this. Everybody wants to be a part of the stake, a part of this ecosystem as a stakeholder to add value there. And I guess that's what we're all trying to figure out. But what I'm just trying to say is that the value is there at some point.
Yep.
You just have to find it.
Exactly.
I'm just going to quickly close on saying from my side is that totally get, because the whole topic is on roles, responsibilities of stakeholders, and I understand the roles of the sponsors, etc. We've spoken to it, and I completely agree. But I think for this forum, and especially for the national federations that are here, and I'm now talking from an education perspective, there are many players out there, and I think like Olympic athletes on the traditional side, and the bigger problem that we will be facing in the future is what happens to these athletes, and therefore government organizations and federations need to actually be thinking about where do the players go in after their career comes to an end from a job perspective. Are universities, educational institutes transitioning into actually bringing them into designing of games, into media, similar to what you're
Into
doing.
governance, there's so many different
etc.
areas,
So
right?
that is also the responsibility of an organization such as this, is to how do we get governments, universities to connect and understand the future of the youth and where they're going to be working, because that also indirectly goes back into the economy of that country. And yeah, that is the long-term role of an organization.
It's a
such as
return on
ours.
the investment, right?
Yes,
And to your point
exactly.
earlier, building the brand, it's like Leopold said in the
Yeah.
opening, the athletes are the entrepreneurs and they're developing their own brand that
Just
way.
to add to that,
Go ahead.
like for example, in the case study of Thailand Esports Federation, recently we were involved with the Education Expo from the Ministry of Education, and there are a lot of social concerns amongst primary school, high school, that they are playing games and classifying that as sport. Well, to be an esports, you have to go through the protocols and the procedures and the regulations of the national federation. But then again, regarding towards the education side, I think once you clean that up and you are able to educate the difference between just playing games and esports, this will make it clear for sponsors to understand and decide whether to allocate those funds or do some kind of engagement or activation for that team or even the federation. And that's where the synergies start to happen and the ecosystem starts to grow.
Starts to build, exactly. Now we're going to go to Q&A soon, so get those questions ready. We have some of the attendants with microphones if you'd like to ask some questions. But before I do that, maybe I just want to go back to Mr. Youngman and just to talk about, you know, the future, right? You've seen the past, you see the present. Where is the future, in your opinion?
각 국가 간에 그 국가의 그 e스포츠가 다 달라요. 예를 들어 한국에 뭐 LOL을 좋아하고 뭐 다른 데는 안 좋아한다. 예를 들면 저희가 고민해야 될 부분이 여기 모인 각 국가의 국가 대항전을 할 때 그 국가대표 선수를 어떻게 선발해 올 거냐 굉장히 중요하잖아요. 이미 프로리그, 예를 들어서 프로리그가 이루어지고 있는데 프로리그 중에 국가대표 선발하기가 굉장히 어려운데 이거를 협회와 정부와 국가대표 선발을 어떻게 하고 이런 기준을 정해서 e스포츠가 더 발전하기 위해서는 여기 모이신 분들이 그런 국가대표 선발에 대한 규정, 그 다음에 그 어떤 게임으로 정식 종목으로 만들어서 국가 간 대항전을 할 거냐 이런 부분들이 국가 내에서 하는 부분들은 이미 이제 각 국가의 환경이 있기 때문에 문제가 없는데 적어도 저희가 IESF 모임에서 고민해야 될 거는 앞으로 그런 국가 대항전을 e스포츠로서 승화시키는데 그런 규정과 이런 룰을 어떻게 만들어서 이게 펼쳐나갈 거냐가 굉장히 해야 할 일인 것 같고요. 또 이런 고민들을 같이 여기 패널 회의에서 다 결정할 수 없지만 또 스테이크 홀더가 그런 그 월드 챔피언십을 대회를 하고 있는데 이걸 e스포츠 씬으로 넘어오려면 그런 어떤 공공성과 이런 투명성에 대한 부분을 같이 논의해서 결정하고 진행돼야 되는 일들이 굉장히 많은데 이런 일들을 앞으로 해결해야 될 거라고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 e스포츠가 굉장히 일반 스포츠 씬에서도 e스포츠를 이렇게 정식 종목으로 할까 말까 고민하고 있는 부분은 이미 이게 스폰서나 이런 부분들의 효과도 받고 이게 스포츠 씬에서 고민 사항을 e스포츠가 해줬으면 하는 기대도 있고 이러기 때문에 아무튼 그 e스포츠가 굉장히 발전할 거로 보여지기 때문에 그런 고민을 같이 했으면 좋겠습니다.
That's great. Awesome. Absolutely. So now we have time for a few questions before we close out our first panel. So, and if you do have any questions, just mention your name, who you would like to address it to, and maybe some of, or maybe all of you might take some of them depending on the question. So who's going to start? So here we go over here. So please stand and state your name and your organization as well.
Hi, my name is Takumi Furusato from Media Create Tokyo, Japan. I have a question to Benjamin-san. You said for the federations in early stage, it's important to identify yourself and your strong point that you are the representative of the national esport. But when you look around, it's not rarely happens that one country has several esports federations or associations. So you think they should be united into one, at least in terms of the sponsorship? Thank you.
Let me recap on that question. I didn't hear correctly. You're talking about whether there should be one federation in that country.
Yes,
correct?
Or you think one country should have only one federation, at least in terms of the sponsorship?
Okay, I mean that would be the correct way to go. I know that there are many different associations, not specifically. Let's put it this way: there are many stakeholders involved when it comes to federation, but you have to be clear on what duty that federation is. For example, the Esports Federation in Thailand is for sports, hence the keyword sports. So that sport is under Ministry of Tourism and Sports, right? That is the authorized direct line chain of command. However, there are social issues concerning esports or games in particular. But gaming comes from private sector. Games come from private companies, developers. It's not under the jurisdiction of governing that sport. So that could be another association. But whether it's an esports or a gamer association, there's an overlap which needs to synergize and work together as one to develop your esports platform in that country and send the best of the best in your country to compete in overseas esports international tournaments. And that would attract more sports. If you come as one, most definitely sponsors or other partners would want to tap into that federation or platform.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. We have another question here. The front row, second row.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm Emma Witowski. I'm from the Australian Esports Association. I'm also an academic. I really appreciate, Nalain, what you were saying about corporate stakeholder responsibility, because it is about rules and responsibility and what can be done. So I consistently hear in my research about players and talk to players who are 23 years of age don't know what to do with themselves. They don't realise all of that experience that they've just gleaned over the last 10 years for some of them, what that could be used for. Is there something that could perhaps be done outside of the educational system, because we're all leaning towards education as a solution? What might stakeholder pastoral care actually start to look like? Will we actually look to the expertise of those stakeholders that are supporting these esports tournaments or associations? And how might perhaps a better mentoring scheme or actual engagement on a one-on-one start looking towards players? Thanks.
There's a lot to unpack. There's some great questions. Maybe you could start with answering that one.
Well, okay, I think well, with my focus being on education, education can transition these youth into jobs. I think what needs to happen is, as I mentioned earlier, that governments need to also start looking at putting pressure on the organizations that are actually making money from these events and the sponsors. For example, the sponsors need to start employing or have, and I know that this is expected from the traditional Olympic partners, that we do employ athletes into organizations, and I think that sponsors of esport could actually consider employing athletes when their careers come to an end, or youth when it comes to an end. And gaming design organizations need to also have an area in which they could have training programs, they could sponsor training programs for the future development and transition of these athletes, but also like yourself, who's lucky enough to find your career within esports, but to actually identify opportunities for these athletes and the gamers going into the future. And I think that, as I said earlier, is the role and responsibility of the people sitting in this room, and it's us together that need to come up with these ideas.
Absolutely, that's great. Do you want to add to that from National Federation, or those things that you can maybe?
Well, I think that one key part of a national federation is focusing on education. And education is a very big word for a lot of different things that we can do for a lot of group ages, or age groups, sorry. From very young age to educate how to properly game and how to keep a healthy gaming lifestyle, to more of the university or the academic ages, where we can actually encourage research and study into the more complex environment of esports and the parallel industries. I think that it's important to always keep in mind that education is something that can come from a lot of areas and a lot of, let's say, regions of studies. I'm probably not using the right word, but regions of studies. From a medical perspective, psychological perspective, sports perspective, many others perspectives. So our job as a national federation, in my opinion, won't be to favor one or another points of interest or points of study, but to just encourage more researchers and more academies and more governmental agencies, ministries or municipal governments and so on, to invest in education for esports.
If I could just add, maybe you're probably going to say the same thing. I was just thinking when you were talking about that, about in the traditional, the Olympics with the Athlete 365 program, which is a tool to help athletes with transition. So those are happening in traditional sports. You have sponsors like, whether it was EY with the Global Women Athlete Business Network, helping athletes to be entrepreneurs, or the ADECO programs helping athletes to find jobs. So there's a lot of these programs that sponsors are doing in traditional sports, which perhaps maybe that's already happening in esports, or it's an opportunity to look at some of those traditional examples that is easily adaptable.
Yeah, I think one of the other simple ones outside of education is the simple solution of, I think all Olympic athletes had to at one point realize their careers coming to an end and that they needed something to fall back on. And this is probably the fundamental or the beginning of an e-sport athlete's career, to say, what would be your backup? Are you interested in medical, or is it law? And is it law then linked to e-sport, representing athletes from e-sport? So it's for each of those athletes to understand what is their second strength, and that needs to be thought of quite early in the process.
That's right, and with all the stakeholders thinking about that too. Yes. That's also
Can
very
I just
important.
add something quickly?
See what you did? This is a great question.
We're talking about career path here with athletes who are reaching their prime and pretty much retire. So the esports, let's face it, it comes from gaming, and it comes from profitable industry, right? So a lot of that is driven by gaming developers and publishers, right? So I think there needs to be more cooperation with the federation, who is the governing body of esports in that country, and develop an ecosystem whereby having a professional amateur league in college or just open tournaments. Now, once you have people who are like Reid here, who, was a gamer, and now he's on a career path of being a caster and all these type of things. There are a lot of universities now that are having these courses. So, okay, if I am a university and I want to have an esports course or management course which adopts traditional curriculum from management as well. So if I graduate, where do I go? And of course, if you have a platform for them to go, for example, a pro league in that country, it's not just about being an athlete. I mean, there are many, many things like law. You need doctors, you need production people, you need newscasters, right? Commentary, and all these type of things in this ecosystem.
That's right.
That after they reach their prime, they can become like a caster or other things that they want to be in that field. So I think, but the thing is, we need cooperation between, because the federation doesn't own the IP, gaming publishers or developers do. So if there's a more flexible cooperation whereby private gaming companies are making money from that market, they should be more giving back to working with public sectors and creating a platform whereby their end users, when they don't want to play games anymore, but still love, that have the passion for esports or for gaming, can be able to fall on that career path.
That's a great answer and a nice way to wrap it up, because we are out of time, and unfortunately we don't have any time for any more questions, but they'll certainly be around if you would like to approach any of them personally. But before I say my final goodbyes to this amazing panel, you all did so well and were able to give some solid, fruitful advice, and of course being here with the legend himself, I think was a real honor for us. So thank you very much, and thank you all very much for your questions. So one more round of applause for our esteemed panelists. Okay. And now we are off to a well-deserved coffee break, and I'd ask that you be back here by 11:20. And I'd also like to let you know that the Esports Academic Seminar Research presentation is in the Venice Room on the same floor, and it's all about esports motivation, so those that want to dive in a little bit more. And also there's a VR archery tournament at the back, so definitely check that out, but I look forward to seeing you at 11:20 when our next panel will be all about policy, so that's going to be a good one too. So thank you very much and enjoy your coffee break.
Shall we get a picture?